Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story.
The alarm went off at 5:45, same as it had for 32 years. My hand reached across the bed before my eyes were open. 38 years of the same motion, reaching for Ruth in the dark. My hand found cold sheets, flat, empty. Before I was fully awake, the morning had already told me everything. She was gone. I lay still with my palm pressed against her side of the bed. The sheets still carried her smell, lavender and something I could never name, something that was simply Ruth. I had washed those sheets twice since she passed. The smell stayed. Maybe it was never really in the fabric. Maybe it was just me, still reaching, still finding her, the only way I had left. I got up and went to the kitchen. For 38 years, Ruth had been the one to make the coffee up before me every morning, moving through the dark house with quiet purpose, a mug already set out with the handle turned toward me by the time I came downstairs. She never once asked me to thank her for it. That was the kind of woman she was. She did the loving things quietly and let them speak for themselves. I stood at the counter and watched the coffee brew and did not put out a second mug. That was the first hard thing of the morning. It would not be the last. I thought about Ruth at 40, standing in this same kitchen, laughing at something on the radio, her hair wrapped in a yellow scarf, moving just slightly to the music because she thought no one was watching. I stood in the doorway a full minute before she turned around. "James Holloway," she said, not embarrassed at all. "You are supposed to be at work." "I am exactly where I need to be," I told her. She smiled, the smile that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth, the one I spent 38 years trying to deserve. I poured my coffee and went upstairs. I found the Class A uniform on the far left of the closet, hanging where I had placed it 4 years ago at retirement. The one with the sergeant's stripes on the sleeve. The one I wore the day Chief Morrison stood me in front of 300 officers and said my name like it meant something. I put it on piece by piece. Shirt, tie, jacket. I pinned the commemorative badge to my left breast pocket and stood at the mirror. Ruth had always straightened my collar. She would step in close, both hands at my throat, smoothing the fabric until it lay exactly right. Then she would step back and study me. "You look like somebody," she always said. Not handsome, not good-looking somebody. A man who counted. Today, I would have to decide that for myself. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened her nightstand. I had not touched it since she died. Inside was her Bible with the cracked spine, a tube of lavender hand cream, and a photograph, the two of us on River Street in Savannah, summer of 1996. Squinting into the sun, her hand in mine. I placed the photograph in my breast pocket, right against my chest, next to the badge. About 3 months before she passed, we sat together in this room in the early evening. She was tired from treatment, but had that particular alert look she got when something was on her mind. "James," she said, "I have taken care of everything." I assumed she meant the arrangements, the funeral home, the cemetery plot, the instructions written in her careful handwriting. Ruth always handled the details. I nodded and told her not to worry. She looked at me a moment longer than the words required, like there was more she wanted to say. Then she said quietly, "I know you, James. You are going to be all right." I believed her then. Standing here in a uniform older than our son, getting ready to drive to the church where we would put her in the ground, I still believed her. I just did not yet understand what she had truly meant. I picked up my keys and drove to Greater Emmanuel Baptist Church. Ruth had loved that church more than any other place on earth, 17 years in the choir, 20 years running the food pantry, knowing every family by name. The parking lot was already full when I arrived. I sat in the truck a moment before getting out long enough to straighten my hat and remind myself what kind of man I intended to be today. Inside every pew was filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with flowers and the warmth of a community saying goodbye to one of its own. At the front, Ruth's casket rested beneath white arrangements, the organ playing low and steady. An usher walked me to the front row, where 3 chairs had been placed beside the first pew, one for me, one for Ruth's sister Dottie, already seated, already weeping softly, and one on my right side, closest to the aisle. Empty. I sat down. I placed my hat on my knee and looked straight ahead at the casket. I made myself one quiet promise. I would not watch the door for my son. Either Marcus would come or he would not. That was his choice to make. I would see it clearly, and I would not look away from it. Pastor Williams stepped to the pulpit. The service began. Pastor Williams had known Ruth for 23 years. You could hear it in the way he said her name, not like a man reading from notes, but like a man who had sat across a table from her, who had eaten her cooking, who had called her when he needed someone steady on the other end of the line. He spoke about her patience, her consistency, the way she showed up year after year, not when it was convenient, but when it was necessary. The congregation responded the way Black church congregations do, not in silence, but in affirmation. Soft voices rising and falling beneath his words, like a second current running under a river. I heard all of it, and I heard none of it. My eyes kept moving to the chair on my right, the empty one. I would pull them back to the casket, hold them there for a minute, and then they would drift again. I could not help it. 32 years of police work had trained me to notice what was missing from a scene as much as what was present. And what was missing from this scene was my son. 40 minutes into the service, I heard the side door open. I did not turn my head. I heard the footsteps, a single set, moving quickly, trying to be quiet and failing. I heard the rustle of someone sliding into a pew near the back. I heard a few soft murmurs from the people nearest to him, the kind of sounds a congregation makes when something interrupts the flow of a service. Then silence again. I kept my eyes forward. After the service, after the burial, after I had stood at the graveside and watched them lower Ruth into the cold Michigan earth, while the wind came off the river and cut straight through my uniform jacket. After all of that, I found Marcus waiting near my truck in the parking lot. He was alone. No Keisha. He was wearing a dark suit that was slightly too small across the shoulders, like a suit bought for a younger version of himself. His eyes were red. But I had been a detective long enough to know the difference between eyes red from crying and eyes red from a long night and not enough sleep. "Dad." He stepped forward and put his arms around me. The embrace was brief and stiff, the hug of a man going through the correct motions. I held on a second longer than he did, the way fathers do. And then I let go. "You were late," I said. He looked away. "Traffic coming from the hotel was bad. I should have left earlier." He paused. "I'm sorry, Dad." I looked at him. He was 38 years old, and he was standing in a parking lot outside his mother's funeral, and he could not hold my gaze. I had interviewed hundreds of men who could not hold my gaze, and I knew what it meant every single time. "Where is Keisha?" I asked. Something moved across his face, too fast to name. There and gone. "She wasn't feeling well," he said. "She wanted to come. She sends her love." Sends her love. Ruth had been sick for 14 months. Keisha had visited the hospital twice, both times in the first month, both times for less than an hour. In the final weeks, when Ruth could barely speak and the morphine drip ran day and night, Keisha had sent flowers. White ones, carnations. Ruth had looked at them and said nothing, which told me everything. I nodded. I did not say what I was thinking. Marcus put his hands in his pockets. He shifted his weight the way he used to when he was 12 and had broken something and was trying to work out how to tell me. I recognized the posture the way you recognize an old song immediately and without having to think about it. "Dad, listen." He glanced toward the church, then back at me. "There are some things we need to talk about. Practical things. About the house, the accounts, Mom's affairs." He paused. "I don't want to get into it today, but soon. In the next day or two. It's important." I looked at my son. I looked at the way his jaw was set, the way his eyes were doing the work of appearing casual, while the rest of him was anything but. I had spent 32 years reading people in rooms where the stakes were high, and the man standing in front of me was not a grieving son working up the courage to handle his mother's estate. He was a man who had already decided something and was waiting for the right moment to announce it. "We'll talk," I said. He nodded, visibly relieved. He squeezed my shoulder once, said he would call tomorrow, and walked to a rental car parked at the far end of the lot. I watched him go. I noticed the car, a mid-size sedan with an out-of-state plate. I noticed the way he got in without looking back. I noticed that he did not stop to speak to a single person from the congregation. Not one of the people who had known him since he was a boy. Not one of the people who had prayed for his mother and sat with his father through the worst months of their lives. He just got in the car and left. I stood in the parking lot after his car had turned the corner and disappeared. The last of the congregation was filtering out of the church behind me, voices low, the occasional hand on my shoulder, the murmured words people offer when they do not know what else to give. I received them all and held on to none of them. I thought about what Ruth had said 3 months ago. "I have taken care of everything." I had assumed she meant the practical matters, the arrangements, the paperwork. But standing here, watching the space where my son's car had been, I found myself wondering if she had meant something else entirely, something larger, something she had seen coming long before I had. I reached into my pocket, not for my keys, for my phone. There was a call I needed to make, not tonight, but soon. Tomorrow morning early before Marcus called with whatever proposition he had been rehearsing on the drive to that hotel. I had 32 years of knowing when someone was working an angle. My own son had just shown me every tell in the book. And unlike the men I had interviewed across metal tables in cold rooms, Marcus did not know that I had already started reading him. I put my phone back in my pocket, got in the truck, and drove home to an empty house. I had not slept. I sat in my armchair through most of the night with the television on and the sound off. At some point, I made eggs I did not eat. At some point, I washed Ruth's coffee mug and stood with my hand on the cabinet door for longer than I should have. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock exactly. Marcus had said a day or two. It had been 1 day. That told me something about the urgency he was working to hide beneath the language of concern. I opened the door. Keisha came through first, before I had fully stepped back, moving into my house, with the ease of someone who had already decided it belonged to her. She wore a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, a leather portfolio under one arm. She looked like she was arriving for a business meeting. Marcus followed behind her, carrying 2 cups of takeout coffee. He held one out toward me. "Dark roast, Dad. How you like it?" I took it. I stepped back and let them in. We sat in the living room. Keisha took the chair directly across from mine, Ruth's chair. She set the portfolio on her knee, crossed her legs, and looked around the room with the eyes of someone calculating square footage. Marcus sat beside her on the sofa, slightly behind, the way a man sits when he has already surrendered the wheel. "James," Keisha began, "not Dad, not Mr. Holloway, just James. We want to talk about your situation going forward. You are 66, you are living alone now, and you have a health condition that requires consistent management. We think it makes sense to put some protections in place." She slid 2 documents across the coffee table, both already tabbed with colored stickers at the signature lines. I did not reach for them. "What kind of protections?" I asked. She touched the first form. "Medical power of attorney. It designates Marcus as your healthcare decision-maker if you become incapacitated, given your diabetes and the potential complications. What do you know about my diabetes? I said. She did not pause. Marcus mentioned it. He said you have been managing it for several years, that there are risks if it goes unmonitored. I looked at Marcus. He studied the floor. What medication am I on? I asked. A brief stillness. I don't know the specific name. What is my doctor's name? Marcus didn't mention that specifically. What clinic do I use? She closed the portfolio slightly. James, we are not here to be interrogated. We are here because we care about what happens to you. I had spent 32 years watching people navigate the gap between what they were saying and what they meant. Keisha was smooth. But smooth is not the same as clean. There was something underneath her presentation rehearsed too many times, textured like a script rather than a conversation. I picked up the documents and looked at the date printed at the top. 3 days before Ruth's funeral. While I was sitting at a hospital making arrangements to bury my wife, someone had been at a computer preparing the paperwork to take over my life. I set them back down. And this one? I asked, nodding toward the second form. Financial power of attorney. Keisha said, her voice smooth again. It would allow Marcus to manage your accounts, your pension, your assets. A protective measure, so that if anything happened to you, everything is handled quickly and cleanly without the courts involved. Without the courts, I repeated. Keeps it in the family, Marcus said from the sofa, right on cue. I looked at my son. The boy I had driven to school every morning for 12 years. The boy I had taught to drive in an empty parking lot, both of us laughing when he clipped the curb. I looked at him sitting behind his wife on Ruth's sofa, looking at the floor, waiting for me to sign something that had been printed 3 days before we buried his mother. I could not find the thread that connected that boy to this man. Leave the papers, I said. I need a few days to read them over. Keisha smiled. Nothing in her eyes moved. Of course. Take all the time you need. They stood. Marcus hugged me at the door briefly, the same embrace as the parking lot yesterday. Keisha shook my hand like we had concluded a meeting. Then they were gone. I closed the door and waited until I heard their car pull away. Then I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called Ray Caldwell. He answered on the second ring. Ray, I said, I need you to look into something. James. His voice went careful. Everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Name the place, I told him. Then I hung up and stood at the kitchen window looking out at Ruth's garden. The flower beds she had worked every spring for 20 years, bare now in the November cold, waiting for a season that she would not be here to see. Something was wrong. I did not have the shape of it yet, but those documents had been printed 3 days before her funeral, and a man who had spent 32 years building cases knew one thing above everything else. Nobody prepares paperwork that fast unless they already know exactly what they are coming to take. After I hung up with Ray, I did not know what to do with myself. That was a strange feeling for me. For 32 years, every hour of every working day had been accounted for. There was always a case, always a file, always somewhere to be, and something to build toward. Retirement had softened that somewhat, and Ruth had filled the space that work left behind. Her projects, her errands, her quiet presence, moving through the rooms of this house like weather, like something you feel before you can name it. Now there was no case, and there was no Ruth. And there was just the house sitting around me in the late afternoon light. Waiting. I walked through it the way I used to walk a crime scene. Slowly, taking inventory. The living room first. Ruth's chair with the slight depression in the cushion where she always sat. The side table with her reading glasses folded on top of a library book she had been 2 chapters from finishing. I picked up the glasses. They were the ones with the thin gold frames she had bought 3 years ago, the ones she said made her look like a professor. I set them back down exactly where they had been, the hallway. Her coat still hanging on the 3rd hook from the left, the burgundy one she wore to church. I had moved mine to a different hook months ago without thinking about it, making room. I did not remember doing that. It struck me now as the kind of thing love does without announcing itself. The bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. The room still carried her in ways that the rest of the house did not quite manage. The particular arrangement of things on her dresser, the slight indentation in her pillow, the smell that was strongest here, and that I had stopped trying to explain to myself. I just sat in it. After a while, I got up and went to the closet. On the shelf above her dresses, behind the fireproof box where she kept the important documents, there was a smaller box, pale blue, the kind that used to hold stationery. I had seen it there for years without ever asking about it. Ruth was a private person in the way that strong people sometimes are. She kept certain things close and did not explain them. And I had learned over 38 years that her privacy was not a wall between us, but a room she was still furnishing. I took the blue box down and sat with it on the edge of the bed. Inside were letters, a few photographs, a folded program from a church concert dated 1989, the year before we were married. A birthday card I had given her on her 50th that she had apparently kept. And at the bottom, beneath everything else, a plain white envelope. My name on the front, in her handwriting. Not James, not Jimmy, the name only she ever called me in private. Just James. Careful and deliberate, the way she wrote when something mattered. Below my name, in smaller letters, open when you need to. I held the envelope for a long time. I thought about what she had said 3 months before she passed. I have taken care of everything. And I thought about the way she had looked at me afterward, that extra beat of eye contact, like she was making sure the message had landed somewhere it would keep. I thought about the documents Keisha had laid on my coffee table this morning, printed 3 days before the funeral, and the smile that had not reached Keisha's eyes when I said I needed time to read them. Ruth had known something. I was becoming more certain of that with every hour that passed. I looked at the envelope. I turned it over. The flap was sealed. I was not ready to open it. I did not know exactly why. I was not a superstitious man, and I was not afraid of words on paper. But something told me this was not the moment. Something told me that whatever Ruth had written in there was meant to be read at a specific kind of moment, a moment I had not yet arrived at. I would know it when I got there. I put the envelope in the breast pocket of my uniform shirt, the one I was still wearing, and held it there under my palm for a moment. Then I went downstairs and heated up the soup that Dottie had left in the refrigerator and ate it standing at the counter because I could not make myself sit at the kitchen table alone. I was rinsing the bowl when my phone rang. Marcus. I dried my hands and answered. Dad. His voice had a brightness to it that was doing too much work. Just checking in, seeing how you're holding up. I'm holding, I said. Good, good. A pause. Did you get a chance to look at those documents at all? There it was. Less than 12 hours since he had left my house, and he was already circling back. I thought about the envelope in my shirt pocket. I thought about Keisha's eyes doing the math on my living room. I've been thinking about it, I said. Of course, take your time. No rush. The brightness again calibrated and unconvincing. We just want to make sure everything is in order. For your sake. I know you do, I said. Another pause, slightly longer. Keisha thinks it would be good to move on this sooner rather than later, just from a practical standpoint. I'm sure she does, I said. Silence on the line. Marcus knew me well enough to hear something in my voice, but not well enough anymore to know what it meant. Okay, Dad, we'll talk soon. We will, I said. Good night, Marcus. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen in the dark for a while. Then I went to bed, still wearing the uniform shirt, the envelope pressed flat against my chest. I did not sleep much, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the night before. The night before I had been empty. Tonight I was thinking. The cafe was called Delroy's, and it had been on the corner of Mac and Cadieux for as long as I could remember. Ray and I had been coming here since our patrol days, back when we were both young enough to think the job was going to be straightforward. The booths were the same cracked red vinyl they had always been. The coffee was strong and came without ceremony. Nobody bothered you, and nobody listened to your business, which made it the best place in Detroit to have a conversation you did not want overheard. Ray was already in our usual booth when I arrived, his coat still on, a cup in front of him, and a folded piece of paper face down on the table beside it. He did not smile when I sat down. Ray Caldwell had one of those faces that told you immediately what kind of information was coming. He had delivered bad news to families for 30 years, and it had left a particular quality of stillness in him. The stillness of a man who had learned that the kindest thing you can do is not make someone wait. "Talk to me," I said. He turned the paper over and slid it across the table. It was a phone log. A single entry, highlighted in yellow, a number I did not recognize, a timestamp, and a destination. The main line of the Lakeview Medical Group on Jefferson Avenue. Dr. Phyllis Grant's practice. My practice. "That call was made 18 days ago," Ray said. "Whoever placed it identified themselves as a representative from your insurance provider, said they were conducting a routine benefits verification and needed to confirm some details about a patient's ongoing treatment plan." He paused. "The patient was you." I looked at the timestamp. 18 days ago, Ruth had still been alive. She'd been in the hospital by then, but she had still been alive. "What did they give them?" I asked. "Not everything." The receptionist got suspicious when the caller started asking about specific medication dosages and dosing schedules that is not standard for a benefits verification call. She put them on hold and went to check with the office manager. When she came back, the caller had disconnected. Ray wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "But before that happened, they confirmed your diagnosis, your primary physician's name, and the general nature of your treatment protocol." I sat with that for a moment. Keisha had been in my living room yesterday morning asking about my diabetes with the carefully constructed curiosity of someone who did not already know the answer. She had stumbled on the name of my doctor. She had not been able to name my medication, but she had known enough the diagnosis, the risks, the language of complications to build a story around it. Because someone had given her the foundation 18 days ago, while Ruth was still breathing in a hospital bed 12 miles away. "The number," I said. "Where does it trace?" "Prepaid phone. Purchased with cash at a drugstore on Woodward. No name, no record." He looked at me steadily. "But the call came from a cell tower 2 blocks from the downtown Marriott. I checked. Marcus had a reservation there from the 14th through the 17th. I did not say anything. I looked at the paper. "James." Ray's voice was careful. "I have known you a long time. I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight." "Go ahead." "Did you already know it was them before you called me?" I thought about the documents on my coffee table printed 3 days before the funeral. I thought about Keisha not knowing my doctor's name. I thought about the way Marcus had looked at the floor when she was speaking, the practiced absence of a man who already knew all the answers and was pretending otherwise. "I suspected," I said. "Now I know." Ray nodded. He picked up his coffee and drank. Outside on Mack Avenue, a city bus went past its brakes, sighing in the cold. "There is something else I need you to check," I said. "Name it." "Ruth had a life insurance policy through Metro Life. $500,000. We took it out 12 years ago." I kept my voice level. "I need you to find out if anyone has touched the beneficiary designation on that policy. Any changes, any requests, any inquiries, anything at all." Ray set his cup down slowly. "James." "I know," I said. "If someone changed the beneficiary on a policy while the insured was..." "I know what it means, Ray." He looked at me for a long moment. The cafe hummed around us, the hiss of the coffee machine, a woman laughing at the counter, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in a city that did not know or care what was happening in this booth. "Give me until this afternoon," Ray said. Take what you need. I left the cafe and drove home through streets that were already going gray with the threat of snow. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The house looked the same as it always had. Brick front, Ruth's empty flower beds along the walk, the maple tree she had planted standing bare against the sky. Everything the same. Everything different. I went inside and made coffee I did not drink and waited for Ray to call me back. While I waited, I thought about Ruth's envelope in my shirt pocket. I thought about what she had said. I thought about the fact that she had looked me in the eye when she said it, which was the thing she always did when something was not optional. I have taken care of everything. Whatever Ray found this afternoon, I was beginning to understand that Ruth had already seen it coming. She had seen it, and she had moved quietly and without telling me, the way she had always handled the things that mattered most. The question was how far she had gotten before she ran out of time. I called Dr. Grant's office from the driveway before I drove over. Her receptionist knew my voice. I had been a patient there for 9 years, and she put me through without making me wait. Dr. Grant picked up herself, which told me she had been expecting the call. Mr. Holloway, she said. I heard about Ruth. I am so sorry. Thank you, I said. I need to come in this morning, not as a patient. I need to talk to you about something that happened with my file. A brief pause. Come now, she said. I have 30 minutes before my first appointment. I drove to Lakeview Medical on Jefferson and parked in the small lot behind the building. The receptionist waved me straight through to Dr. Grant's office at the end of the hall. She was a small woman in her late 50s, precise in the way that good doctors are precise, and she stood up when I came in, rather than staying behind her desk. That told me something too. Sit down, James, she said. I sat. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the desk and told me what had happened. A woman had called the office 17 days ago, identifying herself as a representative from Blue Cross, conducting a routine benefits verification. She had asked to confirm the patient's primary diagnosis, current prescriptions, and treatment schedule. The receptionist had confirmed the diagnosis and the name of the prescribing physician before something felt wrong. The questions had shifted toward dosage specifics and monitoring frequency details that a benefits coordinator would have no legitimate reason to request. The receptionist had put the caller on hold. By the time she returned, the line was dead. Dr. Grant had filed a HIPAA compliance report the following morning. I should have called you directly, she said. I considered it, but with Ruth in the hospital, I did not want to add to what you were already carrying. I understand, I said. Do you know who made the call? I have a strong idea, I said. I may need that compliance report for legal purposes. She opened her desk drawer and slid a manila envelope across to me. I had my office manager pull a copy this morning when you called. I had a feeling that was where this was heading. I took the envelope and thanked her and walked back out to the truck. I sat behind the wheel for a moment. The compliance report was one piece. Ray's phone log was another. They pointed in the same direction, and that direction led straight to my living room and the leather portfolio Keisha had set on Ruth's chair with the signature tabs already in place. I drove home. I turned onto my street and saw their car parked in front of the house before I had even reached the driveway. A rental, same as before. I pulled in slowly and sat for just a moment before getting out. I had not told them I was coming home. I had not told anyone, which meant they had let themselves in with the spare key Marcus had kept since college, the one I had never asked him to return, because it had never occurred to me that I would need to. I went in through the front door. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. I stood in the hallway and listened. From upstairs came the quiet sounds of movement, the soft tread of footsteps, the slide of a drawer, the particular sound a cardboard box makes when it is lifted and set back down. I went up the stairs. The door to the bedroom was open. Keisha was standing at Ruth's side of the closet. She had taken down the pale blue stationery box from the shelf, the box where I had found the envelope the night before, and she was going through it with the focused efficiency of someone who knew what she was looking for. She had not found the envelope, because the envelope was in my shirt pocket, where it had been since last night. Marcus was in the hallway outside the bedroom door. He straightened when he saw me, a look moving across his face that was gone before I could fully read it. "Dad," he said, "we just stopped by to check on you." I looked past him into the bedroom. Keisha had heard my voice and turned around. She was holding a folded document from inside the box, some paper of Ruth's, some record of her life, with the casual grip of someone who had decided it was hers to handle. "Put that back," I said. Her expression did not change. She placed the document back in the box with deliberate slowness, the kind of slowness that is its own form of defiance. "I was just trying to help organize," she said. "There is a lot to go through. It can be overwhelming to do alone." "Put the box back on the shelf," I said. She did. She smoothed her jacket and looked at me with those flat, assessing eyes. I turned to Marcus. He was looking at the floor again. "You should have called before coming," I said. "We were in the neighborhood," he said, which was not an answer. I waited until they had gone back downstairs. Waited until I heard the front door close and the car start and pull away from the curb. Then I went into the bedroom and took the blue box down from the shelf and checked it carefully. The envelope was not in there because it was against my chest, but everything else was accounted for. Ruth's letters, the photographs, the old church program. They had not found what they came for. I did not think they knew exactly what they were looking for, which meant they did not yet know about the envelope. That gave me something. I put the box back and went downstairs and stood in the kitchen. I took the envelope from my shirt pocket and held it in both hands. Not yet, but soon. I was beginning to feel the shape of the moment she had meant it for, and I was not there yet. I put it back against my chest and picked up the phone to call Sandra Miles. Sandra Miles had her office on the 14th floor of a building on Woodward Avenue, the kind of building that smelled of recirculated air and serious money, and the particular silence of people who charged by the hour. Her receptionist was a young man in a pressed shirt who stood when I came through the door and told me Ms. Miles was expecting me without asking my name. Ruth had chosen well. Sandra herself met me at the door to her office rather than waiting behind her desk. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and she had the bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the stakes were high and had learned to take up exactly the space she was entitled to, and not 1 inch less. She shook my hand firmly. "James," she said, "I am glad you called, and I am deeply sorry about Ruth. She was an extraordinary woman." "She was," I said. We sat. Her office was orderly in the way that spoke of real competence rather than performance files in labeled rows. A clean desk, 2 chairs angled toward each other in front of the window, with a view of the city going gray in the November afternoon. She did not open a file immediately. She looked at me first. "Tell me what has happened since the funeral," she said. I told her. I kept it factual and sequential the way I had always written reports. What was observed, when, by whom, what it indicated. The documents printed 3 days before the service. Keisha's knowledge of my medical condition and her failure to know the specifics. The HIPAA violation Ray had traced to a prepaid phone near Marcus's hotel. The compliance report from Dr. Grant. Keisha going through Ruth's belongings in my bedroom while I was out. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. "Ruth came to me 2 years ago," she said. "October of 21. She called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked if she could come in the following Monday. She said she wanted to talk about the future." Sandra looked up. "She did not tell me she was sick yet. She told me that at the second meeting in December. But in October, she already knew. She had known for several weeks, and she was moving." "Moving how?" I said. Sandra opened the file on her desk. It was a thick one, held together with a rubber band, the kind of file that represents years of careful work. She removed the rubber band and turned to a tabbed section near the middle.
Ruth asked me to establish an irrevocable trust, Sandra said. The Ruth and James Holloway Family Trust. All of your jointly held assets, the house, the investment accounts, your pension, beneficiary designations, were transferred into it. Ruth was the primary trustee. Upon her death, trusteeship passes to you alone. She looked at me over the file. No one else has any legal claim to those assets, James. Not through a power of attorney, not through probate. Not through any mechanism Marcus or anyone acting on his behalf could use. Ruth sealed it. I sat with that. I thought about Ruth in October of 2 years ago, calling a lawyer on a Thursday afternoon already sick, not yet telling me. Moving quietly through the necessary steps the way she had always moved through the things that mattered, without announcement, without asking for help. She did not need, getting it done before anyone realized it needed doing. She added a clause herself, Sandra said, and something in her voice shifted slightly, became gentler. Her exact words, which I wrote directly into the document, were, "Make sure James knows I thought of everything." Sandra paused. I asked her if she wanted to explain the clause further. She said, "He will understand it when he needs to." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, Detroit sat under its gray November sky, indifferent and permanent. I reached up and pressed my hand flat against my shirt pocket against the envelope that was still there, still sealed, still waiting. Ruth had written those same words to me, or close enough to them, in the letter I had not yet opened. I thought about the shape of the moment she had meant it for, the moment I had been trying to feel my way toward. I was getting closer. "There is one more thing," Sandra said. She turned to a page near the back of the file. Ruth included a specific provision regarding Marcus. Given his history, and she was very clear-eyed about his history, James, she did not minimize it or excuse it. She stipulated that in the event of any legal action brought by Marcus or any party acting on his behalf against the trust or against you personally, the cost of your legal defense would be drawn from the trust itself. She did not want you to have to fight them with your own hands empty. I looked at the page she had turned to. Ruth's signature was at the bottom, small and precise. The handwriting I had watched sign Christmas cards and permission slips and tax returns for 38 years. She had thought of everything. She had actually thought of everything. "Sandra," I said, "I need you to be available Thursday evening. Can you do that?" She looked at me steadily. "What are you planning?" "I am going to invite Marcus and Keisha to dinner," I said, "and I am going to need you there when it ends." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to tell me what you expect to happen?" "They are going to talk," I said. "People who believe they have already won always talk. I spent 32 years counting on that." Sandra looked at me for a long moment. Then she closed the file and placed both hands flat on top of it. "I will be there," she said. "What time?" 8 o'clock, I said. "Come to the back door." I stood, and she stood with me, and we shook hands again at the door to her office. Her grip was the same as when I had arrived, firm, unhurried. The grip of someone who was not afraid of what was coming. I walked back through the quiet office and out into the hallway and pressed the button for the elevator. When the doors closed, I was alone, and I stood in the small mirrored space and looked at myself in my coat and hat, and thought about Ruth sitting in this same building 2 years ago, sick and undisclosed, building something to protect me from a threat she could see and I could not. The elevator opened on the lobby. I walked out into the cold. The phone rang at 6 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had been nursing for an hour, watching the sky outside the window go from black to the particular deep blue that precedes a Detroit dawn. I had slept 3 hours. That was enough. I had worked on less. I looked at the screen before I answered. Ray. I had known it would be Ray before the first ring finished. "Tell me," I said. He did not ease into it.
Ray Caldwell had never been a man who believed in easing into things, and 30 years of delivering hard news had only reinforced that instinct. "I pulled the records from Metro Life," he said. "There was a beneficiary change request submitted on the policy 6 weeks before Ruth passed. The request designated Marcus Holloway as sole primary beneficiary, replacing the existing designation which named you." I set my coffee cup down carefully. The form was submitted in person at the Metro Life Service Center on Grand River Avenue, Ray continued. "The agent who processed it remembered the transaction because the woman who came in was impatient. She described her as mid-30s, dark hair, wearing glasses. She presented Ruth's policy number, Ruth's identification, and a signed change of beneficiary form." He paused. "The signature on the form matched Ruth's signature on file, closely enough that the agent did not flag it." "But," I said, "but I pulled Ruth's hospital admission records. 6 weeks before she passed, she had been admitted for her second round of intensified chemotherapy. She was in the hospital on the day that form was submitted, James. She was in the building on Michigan Avenue at 2 in the afternoon. The Metro Life Service Center closes the signature at 1:47. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. "She could not have signed it," I said. "She could not have been within 10 miles of it," Ray said. I stood up from the table. I walked to the window and looked out at Ruth's garden, the bare flower beds, the cold November ground. 6 weeks before she passed, she had still been fighting then, still believing there was something left to fight for. And while she was lying in a hospital bed on Michigan Avenue, with chemicals moving through her bloodstream, someone had walked into a service center on Grand River and signed her name. "The camera footage," I said. "The service center keeps 30 days. It is gone. But the agent's description is consistent." Ray let that sit for a moment. "And James, I found something else. The same prepaid phone that called Dr. Grant's office also placed 2 calls to the Metro Life customer service line in the weeks before the form was submitted. The calls lasted 4 and 7 minutes respectively, long enough to ask about the process for changing a beneficiary designation, long enough to get it right." I pressed my hand against the window glass. It was cold against my palm. "They planned this," I said, not a question. "This was not impulsive," Ray said. "Somebody researched the process, called ahead to understand exactly what documentation would be needed, and then walked in with everything prepared. This took weeks of preparation, James. Weeks, while Ruth was still alive." I thought about Keisha sitting in Ruth's chair in my living room with her leather portfolio and her colored signature tabs, smooth and prepared, everything in order. I thought about Marcus on the sofa behind her looking at the floor. "Ray," I said, "I need you Thursday evening, 8 o'clock, my house." "Done," he said without asking why. That was Ray. 30 years of partnership had made certain questions unnecessary. "Bring whatever documentation you have. The phone logs, the agent's statement, everything. I will have it together by tomorrow afternoon," he said. "James." A pause. "Are you all right?" I thought about that for a moment. "I will be," I said. "After Thursday." We hung up. I stood at the window for a while longer. Then I went upstairs to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot where I had found the blue box 2 nights ago. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the envelope. I looked at my name in Ruth's handwriting. James. Below it, in smaller letters, "Open when you need to." I needed to now. I was certain of that in a way I had not been before Ray's call. The shape of the moment had arrived. I opened the envelope carefully, the way you open something you intend to keep. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, covered on both sides in Ruth's small, careful handwriting. I unfolded it and began to read. She had written it in October of 2 years ago, she said, on the same day she had called Sandra Miles. She had known, for 3 weeks by then, known what the doctors were telling her, known the probabilities. She had not told me yet because she was still deciding how. But she had started moving. She wrote about Marcus. She wrote about it plainly, without bitterness, the way Ruth handled painful things by looking directly at them. She had seen the changes in him over the years, she said. The distance, the choices, the way Keisha had gradually become the only voice he seemed to hear. She did not blame Keisha entirely. She said Marcus had made his own decisions and that she had spent too many years trying to soften that truth for both of us. She wrote, "James, I know what they will try to do. I know it the way I know you, because I have been watching both of you for a long time, and I know how each of you moves. I could not stop them, but I could make sure they could not touch what we built. The house is safe. The accounts are safe. Sandra knows everything." And then, near the bottom of the page, in letters slightly larger than the rest, as if she had pressed harder on the pen, "Do not carry this alone. You were never meant to carry things alone. That was always your one mistake, and I loved you anyway for it." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after I finished reading. I folded the letter back along its original creases and placed it in the envelope and put it back in my shirt pocket. Then I got up, went downstairs, and picked up the phone to call Marcus. It was time to invite my son to dinner. I dialed Marcus's number standing at the kitchen counter. It was 8:15 in the morning. I had rehearsed what I was going to say, not the words exactly, but the quality of them, the register, the pace, the particular texture of a man who was frightened and trying not to show it. I had spent enough years listening to frightened men to know exactly how they sounded. Now, I needed to become one. Marcus answered on the third ring. "Dad." Immediately alert, the way he always was when I called these days, like a man waiting for a verdict. I let a small silence pass before I spoke. Just long enough. "Son," I said, and I let my voice carry the weight of a sleepless night and a kitchen that was too quiet. It was not entirely a performance. "I've been up since before 5, sitting here, thinking." "Dad, are you all right?" "I don't know," I said. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily, letting the chair scrape against the floor so he could hear it. "I've been going back and forth on those papers you brought, the ones Keisha put together." A shift in his breathing. "Okay," he said carefully. I think maybe you're right," I said. "About needing help. About not being able to manage everything on my own." I paused. "I don't want to admit that. You know how I am. But sitting here in this house alone, I keep thinking about what happens if something goes wrong. What happens if the diabetes gets ahead of me? What happens if I fall or forget something important?" I let the words slow down. "Your mother always handled those things. Now she's gone, and I just don't know how to do this without her." The silence on his end was the silence of a man recalibrating. I could hear him breathing. I could hear faintly Keisha's voice somewhere in the background, too low to make out words. "Dad," Marcus said, and his voice had changed completely, the wariness replaced by something that sounded almost like warmth. "Almost. You don't have to figure it out alone. That's what we've been trying to tell you. We want to help." "I know," I said. "I know that. I needed a little time to get there." Another pause. "I was thinking, could you and Keisha come for dinner Thursday evening? I'd like to sit down together, the three of us, and talk this through properly. I'll cook." "Thursday." I heard him relay this to Keisha. A moment of muffled conversation. Then, "Yeah, Dad, Thursday works. What time?" 7 o'clock, I said. "We'll be there." He sounded relieved. Genuinely, deeply relieved. The relief of a man who had been waiting for a door to open and had just heard the latch give way. "It's going to be okay, Dad. I promise." "I know it will," I said. "I'll see you Thursday, son." I hung up. I sat at the table for a moment, with the phone in my hand. Then I put it down and went upstairs to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I had interviewed men who lied for a living, men who had built entire parallel lives on the architecture of deception and maintained them for years without cracking. The best ones shared a common trait. They did not think of what they were saying as lying. They found a version of the truth inside the fiction, and they held onto it like an anchor. It kept them steady. It kept them believable. I thought about what I had just said to my son. I had told him I did not know how to do this without Ruth. That was true. I had told him that sitting alone in this house frightened me. That was true as well, or had been in the first days after she passed. I had told him I needed help. In a different life, with a different son, that might have been true too. The fiction was only in the conclusion I had let him draw from it. I went back downstairs and took the small voice recorder from the drawer where I had placed it after buying it on Tuesday. It was no larger than a pack of cards, matte black, unremarkable. I checked the battery, full. I checked the memory, empty and ready. I pressed record and spoke a few words into it at normal conversation volume, then played them back. Clear, clean, every word distinct. I clicked it off and held it in my hand. 32 years ago, the first time I worked a case that required a wire, my supervising detective had told me something I had never forgotten. He said, "The recording is not the trap. The trap is their own mouth. All you are doing is making sure their mouth cannot be taken back." I put the recorder in my shirt pocket. It sat there next to the envelope, next to the photograph of Ruth and me in Savannah, the two things I was carrying into Thursday evening. I called Ray. He answered before the second ring. "Thursday's confirmed," I said. 7 o'clock for them, 8 for you and Sandra. Come to the back. "Understood," Ray said. "I'll have everything organized and ready." "One more thing," I said. "Coming quiet. No lights, no radio. Park on the next block and walk." A brief pause. "James, how deep is this going?" I looked out the kitchen window at Ruth's empty garden, at the bare ground where she had planted things every spring for 20 years, patient and certain, trusting the season to come. "Deep enough," I said. The rest of Thursday was preparation. I went to the store and bought the things I needed for dinner. Nothing elaborate. A meal that looked like the effort of an old man doing his best. Slightly overcooked, a little too much salt in one dish, not enough in another. The performance had to extend to the table. In the afternoon, I sat in the living room and read through the file Sandra had sent over the trust documents and the provisions Ruth had insisted on, the clause about legal costs, the ironclad language she had asked Sandra to use. I read it the way I used to read a case file the night before an arrest, looking for the gaps, checking the angles, making sure every avenue was closed. There were no gaps. Ruth had not left any. By 6 o'clock, the house smelled of food, and the table was set, and the recorder was in my pocket, and the envelope was against my chest, and I was as ready as I was going to be. I sat in the armchair, my armchair, the one by the window, and I looked at the room around me. The room Ruth had arranged and painted and filled with 38 years of living. The room they intended to renovate and empty and make into something that had nothing to do with either of us. Not tonight. Not ever. I heard a car slow on the street outside. I looked at the clock. 7 o'clock exactly. Keisha set her wine glass down and leaned back slightly in her chair. She had the look of a woman deciding how much to give and how much to hold back, running the calculation behind her eyes, while her face stayed pleasant and composed. 3 years of watching her in family settings had taught me that this was her default mode, always measuring, always managing, always deciding what version of herself to present to which room. But she had also had 2.5 glasses of wine, and Marcus had had 3. And they both believed they were sitting across from a confused and frightened old man who had just invited them to take everything he had built. She decided to give. "The life insurance is handled, James," she said, with the smooth assurance of someone delivering good news. "You don't need to worry about tracking down paperwork. We made sure everything was properly organized while there was still time to do it cleanly." I looked at her with the open, grateful expression of a man who did not know what that sentence actually meant. "You did? When was that?" "A few weeks before she passed," Keisha said. She picked up her wine glass again, a small reward to herself for having navigated the moment gracefully. We wanted to make sure the transition would be smooth. For your sake. These things can get so complicated if they're not addressed in advance. I had no idea, I said. Ruth never mentioned it. Marcus cleared his throat. We didn't want to burden you with details while you were already dealing with so much. He said it with the practiced concern of someone who had rehearsed the line. The important thing is that it's sorted. How does it work exactly? I said. I was never very good with the financial side of things. Ruth always explained it to me, but I'm afraid I didn't always follow. I looked between them with the helpless expression of a man who needed things spelled out slowly. The money goes to who exactly? Does it come to me directly? Another exchange of glances across the table. Keisha made a small decision. The beneficiary designation was updated, she said carefully, to make sure the funds could be accessed and managed properly without the delays that come with probate. It's a common estate planning strategy. Updated to whose name? I asked. Marcus is listed as the primary beneficiary, Keisha said. Which makes practical sense, James. He can receive the funds and use them to take care of you, to cover your medical expenses, your living costs. It flows through him to you. It's actually more efficient than having it go directly. That does make sense, I said slowly, as if I were working it out. And Ruth, she agreed to this. The briefest hesitation, so brief that a man who had not spent 32 years listening for hesitations would have missed it entirely. She was on board with the overall plan, Marcus said. She understood what we were trying to do. She couldn't always communicate clearly by that point, Keisha added, and her voice had the practiced gentleness of someone handling a fragile object. But she understood. We made sure of that. I nodded, slowly, as if this satisfied me. I reached for my water glass. Under the table, the fingers of my right hand found the recorder in my shirt pocket and confirmed it was still running. It was. And the form itself? I said, keeping my voice vague and wondering. How did that work? Ruth was so ill by then. I can't imagine she was able to get to an office. Keisha smiled. It was a small smile. The smile of a woman who had handled this particular problem and was quietly proud of the solution. It was taken care of, she said. The important thing is that it's done and it's legal, and you don't have to think about it anymore. Keisha went in person, Marcus said. He said it with a trace of the pride men sometimes show when they believe their wife has been competent on their behalf. She handled the whole thing. Keisha shot him a look. Not sharp enough to be a warning, she was too controlled for that, but particular. He did not catch it. He was on his fourth glass now, rolling the stem between his fingers, leaning forward in his chair with the loosened posture of a man who believed the deal was done. She had everything prepared, he continued. The paperwork, the ID, all of it. In and out in 20 minutes. He looked at me with something that might have been in a different life, genuine filial warmth. That's the kind of thing you need people in your corner for, Dad. People who will handle the hard stuff so you don't have to. I can see that, I said. I let a moment pass. I looked at my plate. Then I looked up at Keisha with the expression of a man struck by a gentle curiosity. The ID, I said. Whose ID did you use, Ruth's? The table went still. Keisha's expression did not change. Her expression almost never changed when she was managing a situation. But something shifted in her posture, so small, so controlled, that only someone who had been watching for it would see it. It was a joint account matter, she said evenly. The documentation required was straightforward. Of course, I said. Of course. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make it sound like I'm questioning anything. I know you did everything right. I picked up my fork and then set it down again, as if I had forgotten what I meant to do with it. It is just, Ruth was in the hospital that day. I remember because I was there with her. I was with her almost every day by then. I looked at Keisha with soft, confused eyes. I don't understand how she could have signed anything if she was in the hospital. The silence that followed was different from the silence earlier in the evening. That silence had been cautious. This one was the silence of two people who had just watched the floor shift beneath them and were not yet sure how far it would give. Marcus put his wine glass down. Keisha looked at me. For the first time all evening, the calculation behind her eyes was visible. Not because she had lost control of her expression, but because there was too much happening behind it for the surface to fully contain. "James," she began. The doorbell rang. 8 o'clock, exactly as planned. I looked at the door. I looked back at them. I allowed myself for just a moment to let the performance drop. Not fully, not dramatically, just enough that something real showed through. Enough that they could see, if they were paying attention, that the man across the table from them had not been confused at all. "That," I said quietly, "will be dessert." I stood up from the table, not the way an old man stands, not slowly, not with one hand braced against the surface for support. I stood the way I had stood at 34 when I took my oath, the way I had stood at 51 when I made sergeant, straight-backed and deliberate. Every inch of the posture I had spent the last 4 days carefully hiding, returning to me, all at once, like something that had been waiting patiently for permission to come back. Marcus blinked. Keisha went very still. I walked to the front door and opened it. Sandra Miles stood on the porch, in her coat, her briefcase in one hand, the cold November air moving past her into the warmth of the house. She stepped inside without being asked, the way competent people step into rooms they have been summoned to. And I closed the door behind her. "Who is that?" Marcus said. He had pushed back from the table slightly, the automatic response of a man whose body has registered a threat before his mind has caught up to it. "This is Sandra Miles," I said. "She is an attorney. She has been Ruth's attorney for the past 2 years." I walked back to the table and stood at the head of it. "And she is here because there are some things that need to be said clearly and on the record, and I want a witness." Keisha set her wine glass down. The pleasant composure she had maintained all evening was still in place, but it had changed quality. It was no longer the composure of confidence. It was the composure of someone holding themselves together by force of will. "James," she said, her voice careful and measured. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but..." I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the recorder. I placed it on the table between us. The little device sat there in the candlelight, small and unremarkable, and absolute. "I think what is happening," I said, "is that you are going to listen." I pressed play. The sound that came out of that small machine filled the dining room with a clarity that made the candlelight seem suddenly brighter. Keisha's own voice, smooth and assured, explaining how the beneficiary designation had been updated. Marcus's voice, loose with wine and the confidence of a man who believed he was among friends, telling me that Keisha had gone in person, that she had handled the whole thing in and out in 20 minutes. Then my own voice, old and wondering, asking how Ruth could have signed anything when she was in the hospital. And then the silence. The specific, incriminating silence of two people who had just heard the floor give way. I clicked the recorder off. Marcus stared at it. The color had gone from his face in a way that had nothing to do with the wine. Keisha had not moved. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on me, and for the first time since I had known her, the calculation behind them had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Sandra set her briefcase on the sideboard and opened it. She removed a document and placed it on the table beside the recorder. The trust document, the one Ruth had signed in Sandra's office 2 years ago. The one with Ruth's small, precise signature at the bottom of the final page. "This," Sandra said, "is the Ruth and James Holloway Family Trust, executed in October of 2021. All jointly held assets, the house, the accounts, the investment portfolios, were transferred into this trust at the time of its creation. As the surviving trustee, James has sole authority over all of those assets. No power of attorney, no probate process, no legal mechanism of any kind can override this document. Marcus looked at the trust document. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he did not know existed, and is now understanding was there all along, underneath everything, waiting. "That's not," he started. "It is entirely legal," Sandra said. "I drafted it. I witnessed it. It has been on file with the county recorder's office for 2 years. I reached into my shirt pocket again, not for the recorder this time, for the envelope. Ruth's envelope, the one I had carried against my chest for 3 days, the one I had finally opened in the gray light of Thursday morning, with Ray's voice still in my ear. I unfolded the letter and smoothed it against the table. "Ruth wrote this 2 years ago," I said. "The same week she called Sandra. The same week she started building the thing that would make sure none of you could touch what we built together." I looked at Marcus. "I want you to hear what she said." I read from the letter. Not all of it. Some of it was mine alone and would stay that way. But I read the part that mattered. I read it slowly, the way you read something that deserves to be heard. "James, I know what they will try to do. I know it the way I know you, because I have been watching both of you for a long time, and I know how each of you moves. I could not stop them, but I could make sure they could not touch what we built. The house is safe. The accounts are safe. Sandra knows everything." The room was completely silent. I folded the letter and placed it back in my pocket, back against my chest, where it had been for 3 days. Marcus was looking at the table. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him, and he was not moving, and something in his face had changed in a way that was difficult to name. Not guilt exactly, not shame exactly, but something in the region of both. Something that a man arrives at when he understands not just that he has been caught, but that his mother knew, that she had known for 2 years, that she had loved him enough to protect his father from him, and had not said a word. Keisha pushed back from the table. "This is absurd," she said, and her voice had dropped the pleasantness entirely. "A recording made without consent. A trust document we have never seen. A letter that could have been written by anyone." "It was written by Ruth," Sandra said. "I have her original handwriting samples on file from 2 years of correspondence. A forensic analysis would take approximately 4 days. Furthermore," Sandra continued, opening to a second page in her briefcase documents, "the HIPAA compliance report filed by Dr. Phyllis Grant's office on November 3rd details a fraudulent call made to that practice from a prepaid mobile device. The call was traced to a cell tower within 2 blocks of the downtown Marriott where Marcus Holloway had a registered reservation." She looked at Keisha. "And the MetroLife Service Center on Grand River Avenue has an employee who provided a description of the woman who submitted the beneficiary change form. We have that description in writing." Keisha said nothing. The composure was still there technically, but it had become the composure of someone who has decided that stillness is the safest available option. I looked at my son. He had not looked up from the table. "Marcus," I said. He raised his eyes. In them, I saw the boy from the parking lot, the boy I had been trying to find since Tuesday, and finding him now, in these circumstances, was the saddest thing I had encountered in a week that had not been short of sadness. "Your mother knew," I said. "She knew, and she still loved you. She just loved me enough to make sure you couldn't hurt me." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The doorbell rang again. I went to the door and opened it. Ray Caldwell stood on the porch in his good coat, the charcoal one he wore when he meant business, a red accordion folder under his arm. Behind him, further back in the darkness of the porch, I could see 2 uniformed officers standing quietly, their breath showing in the cold air. Ray looked at me once, a look that asked if I was ready, and I answered it with a small nod. He stepped inside. He moved through the hallway with the unhurried authority of a man who had walked into difficult rooms for 30 years and had never once needed to announce himself to be heard. He came into the dining room and stopped at the edge of the table and looked at Marcus and Keisha the way a detective looks at subjects not with hostility, not with contempt, but with the particular quality of attention that communicates clearly that he has already done his homework and is here to conclude a matter rather than begin one. Marcus looked up. Something moved across his face when he saw the folder. "Who is this?" he said, but his voice had lost its authority entirely. It was the voice of a man asking a question he already knew the answer to, and was hoping he was wrong. "This is Ray Caldwell," I said. "He retired from the Detroit Police Department 3 years ago. Before that, he was a detective for 28 years. He has been conducting an investigation on my behalf since Tuesday morning." Ray set the red folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. Inside were printed documents organized in labeled sections: the phone logs, the agent's written statement from Metro Life, the HIPAA compliance report from Dr. Grant's office, the cell tower records. He had arranged them in the order a prosecutor would arrange them, each piece building on the last, the whole of it forming a structure that had no exits. He began to speak. He spoke the way he had always spoken in interview rooms, quietly, precisely, without emphasis or theater, letting the facts carry their own weight. "The prepaid mobile device used to call Dr. Grant's office on November 3rd, Ray said, made 2 prior calls to Metro Life customer service on October 9th and October 14th, respectively. The calls lasted 4 minutes and 7 minutes. Their purpose, based on the questions asked, was to obtain detailed information about the process for submitting a beneficiary change form." He turned to the next section. "That same device was active on a cell tower located 2 blocks from the downtown Marriott on all 3 dates. Marcus Holloway had a registered reservation at that hotel from October 8th through October 19th. He paused. He looked at Keisha. "The Metro Life Service Center employee who processed the beneficiary change form on October 21st provided a written description of the woman who submitted it. Mid-30s, dark hair, glasses, a dark coat. She described the woman as impatient and well-prepared. She had all documentation ready before being asked for it, which the employee noted as unusual." Ray reached into the folder and removed a photograph. He placed it face up on the table. It was a still image from a traffic camera on Grand River Avenue, date and time stamped October 21st at 1:43 in the afternoon. The image showed a woman in a dark coat walking toward the Metro Life Service Center entrance. The resolution was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Keisha looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. "Furthermore," Ray said, "I obtained records from the hospital on Michigan Avenue confirming that Ruth Holloway was an inpatient on October 21st from 7 in the morning through 11 at night. She received treatment at 2:15 in the afternoon." He closed the folder. "The form was signed at 1:47. Ruth Holloway could not have signed it. The signature is a forgery." The dining room was absolutely quiet. Then I saw it happen. I had expected it. I had built the evening around the likelihood of it, but seeing it happen was something different from expecting it. Keisha turned to the uniformed officers who had followed Ray into the room and positioned themselves near the doorway. She turned to them before Ray had said another word, and she said in a voice that was steady and clear and entirely without hesitation, "I want to make a statement. I have been trying to tell my husband for months that this was wrong. He pressured me into it. I went to that office because he told me it was legal." That Ruth had given verbal consent before she lost the ability to communicate. I didn't know it was fraud. I was following his instructions. Marcus turned to look at her. The look on his face was not anger. It was not even surprise, not entirely. It was the look of a man who, in the space of 1 second, has understood something about the person sitting next to him that reorganizes everything he thought he knew about the last several years. It was the look of a man realizing that he had not been the architect of this plan. He had been the material. "Keisha," he said, just her name, nothing else. She did not look at him. Ray looked at me. I gave him the small nod he was waiting for. "Marcus Holloway," Ray said, turning to my son, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud and forgery related to the Metro Life beneficiary change form and the HIPAA violation at Lakeview Medical Group. He reached for his jacket. Keisha Holloway, you are being detained as a material witness and potential co-conspirator. That determination will be made at the station based on the statement you just provided and the physical evidence.
Marcus stood up from the table slowly, the way a man stands when his legs are not entirely reliable. He looked at Ray. He looked at Sandra. He looked at the red folder and the photograph and the trust document and the recorder still sitting in the middle of the table. He looked at all of it, the way a man looks at the evidence of his own choices when there is no longer any question of what those choices have cost. Then he looked at me. "Dad," he said. His voice was very quiet. The wine and the confidence and the careful, rehearsed language were all gone, and what was left underneath was something much younger and much more frightened, and I thought much more honest than anything I had heard from him in years. "Dad, I didn't think it would go this far. I thought it was just paperwork." I looked at my son for a long moment. "It was never just paperwork, Marcus," I said. "It was never just money. It was what your mother and I built. It was what she spent the last 2 years of her life protecting. It was everything." He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say. I turned to Ray. "Take them," I said. The 2 uniformed officers moved into the room with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times before. One went to Marcus, one went to Keisha. Neither of them resisted physically Marcus, because the fight had gone out of him entirely. Keisha, because she was too controlled to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her struggle. Keisha went first. The officer asked her to stand and place her hands behind her back, and she did both without being asked twice. Her chin up, her face composed in the particular way of someone who has already decided on their next move and is simply waiting for the current scene to end. The cuffs clicked into place, and she straightened her jacket with a small reflexive motion, as much of her dignity as she could salvage in the moment. And then she looked across the table at me. "You will regret this," she said. Her voice was even and certain, the voice she used in every room she had ever been in. The voice of a woman who had always believed that outcomes were things she could manage if she stayed composed enough and moved fast enough. "Marcus needs help. He has a problem. He needed guidance and you abandoned him, and this is what happened. That is on you as much as it is on him." I looked at her. I did not respond. I had learned a long time ago that some statements are not arguments. They are performances, and the worst thing you can do for a performance is give it an audience. The officer guided her toward the hallway. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back at Marcus, who was still standing at the table with the other officer beside him. She looked at him the way you look at something you are deciding whether to take with you or leave behind. Then she turned and walked out without speaking to him. Marcus watched her go. He watched the empty doorway for a moment after she had passed through it. Then he looked down at his hands, at the good watch on his wrist, at the suit jacket that had cost more than a month of his mother's nursing bills. He looked at these things the way a man looks at the artifacts of a life he has been living on borrowed foundations, and the foundations have just been removed. The officer spoke to him quietly. Marcus nodded and placed his hands behind his back without being told twice. The cuffs went on. The sound they made in the quiet of Ruth's dining room was very specific and very final. The sound of a mechanism completing its intended function. Before the officer turned him toward the door, Marcus looked at me. I had been waiting for this moment and dreading it in equal measure. I had told myself on Tuesday, when I first understood what had been done, that I would feel nothing when it came to this. I had told myself that 32 years of the job had given me the equipment to stand in a room and watch consequences find the people who had earned them without any of it touching the inside of me. I had been wrong about that. The front door closed. A moment later, I heard car doors, an engine, the sound of vehicles pulling away from the curb and moving down the street.
I stood at the head of the table and listened until the sound was gone entirely. Ray came and stood beside me. He did not say anything for a moment. Ray had always understood when silence was the right thing to offer. "The charges will hold," he said finally. "The evidence is clean. Sandra will make sure the civil side is handled properly. The trust protects everything, just like Ruth set it up to do." He paused. "It's over, James." I looked at the empty chairs, at Keisha's wine glass, still half full, her lipstick on the rim. At Marcus's plate, the food barely touched after the first glass of wine. At Ruth's good dishes that I would wash tonight and put away and bring out again someday for a reason that deserved them. "Is it?" I said. Ray looked at me. "The legal part," I said. "Yes, I know that's over." I reached up and pressed my hand against my shirt pocket, against the letter and the photograph that were still there. "The rest of it takes longer." Ray nodded. He understood that too. Sandra came out of the kitchen where she had gone to make a quiet phone call after the officers left. She looked at me with the composed, careful expression of a woman who had seen the inside of many difficult evenings and knew that the paperwork that followed was sometimes the easier part. "I'll file the protective motions tomorrow morning," she said. "The trust is airtight, whatever they attempt from the legal side, and Keisha will attempt something. It will not go anywhere." "Thank you, Sandra," I said. She nodded, picked up her briefcase, and let herself out through the front door. The house was quiet again, the specific quiet of a place from which something large and disruptive has just departed. Ray put his hand briefly on my shoulder. "You all right?" he said. I thought about Ruth at 40 in the yellow scarf. I thought about her sitting in Sandra's office 2 years ago, sick and undisclosed, building something to protect me from what she could already see coming. I thought about the letter in my pocket and the photograph and the empty chair at the head of the table where she should have been sitting. "I will be," I said. Ray stayed another 20 minutes. We did not talk about Marcus or Keisha or the charges or what came next. We stood in the kitchen and Ray made coffee, and we drank it standing at the counter the way we had drunk coffee in 100 parking lots and break rooms over 30 years. And we talked about other things, small things, the things you talk about when the big thing is too large to approach directly, and you need time to let it settle. Then he left. I locked the door behind him, the real lock, the deadbolt, the one I controlled. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went back to the dining room and began to clear the table. I woke at 6 without the alarm. For a moment, in the space between sleep and full waking, I reached across the bed the way I always did. Cold sheets, the same as every morning since she passed. But this morning, the reaching felt different. Not like loss exactly, or not only like loss. More like the motion of a man who knows what he will find and has made a kind of peace with finding it. I lay still for a moment, with my palm flat against her side of the bed, and then I got up. The house looked different in the morning light. Not changed, everything was where it had always been. The furniture, the photographs, the small accumulated evidence of a life built in common. But the quality of the air was different. The heaviness that had settled into the rooms since Ruth passed, and that had thickened considerably over the past 4 days with the presence of people who wanted to take what was not theirs, had lifted. The house smelled of itself again. Wood and coffee and the faint ghost of Ruth's lavender. I opened the windows in the kitchen, despite the cold, and let the November air move through. I washed the dishes from last night. Ruth's good dishes, the ones with the gold rim. I washed each one carefully and dried it and put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. I stripped the tablecloth and put it in the wash. I folded the cloth napkins and returned them to the drawer. I wiped down the table and the sideboard and the chairs, and when I was finished, the dining room looked the way it had looked on every ordinary evening of the last 20 years, clean and quiet. And ours. Then I made coffee and sat down. Sandra called at 9:15. She had already been at her office for 2 hours. "The insurance company's fraud division contacted me this morning," she said. Metro Life initiated their own investigation last night after Ray submitted the documentation to the fraud unit. They have suspended the beneficiary change pending the investigation's outcome, which, based on the evidence Ray provided, should be straightforward. She paused. The existing beneficiary designation, you as Ruth, named you 12 years ago, remains in effect. The $500,000 is yours.
James, it was always yours. I sat with that for a moment. $500,000 that Ruth had set aside 12 years ago for the life she intended us to have together, that someone had tried to redirect while she was fighting to stay alive, was sitting in an account with my name on it. I did not feel triumphant about this. I felt the weight of what it represented. Ruth's foresight, Ruth's care. Ruth working 12 years ago to make sure that whatever happened, I would be all right. She had thought of everything. She always had.
Thank you, Sandra, I said.
There's one more thing, she said.
Keisha retained counsel last night, a criminal defense attorney. She is cooperating with the prosecutor's office in exchange for a reduced charge, which means she will be providing a full account of her role and Marcus's role in the fraud. Sandra's voice was careful. James, this means Marcus's exposure is significant. The prosecutor will have Keisha's testimony, the physical evidence, and the recording. He is looking at serious charges.
I understand, I said.
Do you want me to do anything? There are options at this stage if you wanted to.
No, I said. Let it run its course.
A brief silence.
All right, Sandra said. I'll be in touch. I hung up and finished my coffee and was rinsing the mug when I heard a knock at the front door. Not the bell, a knock. The specific pattern of someone who had been knocking on this particular door for 30 years and had his own rhythm for it. I opened it. Ray stood on the porch in his weekend coat, holding a white paper bag from the bakery on Harper. "Brought donuts," he said. "The glazed ones. Don't tell me you've eaten already." "I haven't," I said, and stepped back to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, not the dining room, the kitchen, where the light was better in the morning, and the table was smaller, and it felt less like the scene of something, and more like just a kitchen. Ray put the bag between us, and we helped ourselves and drank coffee, and talked about the Lions who had lost on Sunday in a way that Ray found personally offensive, and about the weather, which was going to turn properly cold by the weekend, and about a restaurant on East Jefferson that Ray's wife had been wanting to try. We did not talk about Thursday evening. We did not talk about Marcus or Keisha or charges or courts. There would be time for all of that. This morning was not that time. After Ray left, I stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking out at Ruth's garden. The flower beds were bare and dark in the cold morning light, the soil turned over from the last time she had worked it in September, 2 months before she passed. She had gone out there on a Saturday afternoon when she was feeling well enough, and she had turned the beds and pulled the last of the season's growth and mulched everything over for the winter, working steadily and without hurry, the way she did everything, and I had watched her from this same window and thought that she looked strong. I had thought that afternoon that she was going to be all right. I was still standing at the window when I heard the mail slot in the front door open and close. I went to the hallway. On the floor beneath the slot was the usual small stack, a utility bill, a circular from a grocery store, and a plain white envelope with no return address. The postmark was from the county correctional facility on Moundview Road. The handwriting on the front was Marcus's. I stood in the hallway with the envelope in my hand. I looked at my name, written in my son's handwriting. The same handwriting I had watched develop over 30 years, from the uncertain block letters of a first grader to this, the neat, controlled script of a grown man, writing from a place he had put himself. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and set it down. I looked at it for a long time. Then I got up and refilled my coffee and sat back down and looked at it some more. I did not open it. 3 weeks passed. They passed the way weeks pass after something large has happened. Not quickly, not slowly, but with a quality of deliberateness, each day asking something specific of you, and waiting
while you worked out how to answer it. I cooked, I walked, I tended to Ruth's flower beds, turning the soil and adding fresh mulch against the coming deep freeze, doing the work she had done in September and that I had watched from the window without thinking to help with, because I had believed that afternoon
that there would be more Septembers.
Sandra called twice with updates. The investigation was proceeding. The charges had been formalized. Marcus had retained his own attorney, not the one Keisha had recommended. A different one, which Sandra said was probably the first independent decision he had made in years. The legal process would take the time it took. I had stopped trying to calculate that time.
The letter from Marcus sat on my kitchen table for 11 days before I moved it. I moved it to the mantel in the living room next to Ruth's photograph, where I could see it from the armchair. I did not open it. I was not ready, and I had learned from Ruth that there was wisdom in waiting for the right moment rather than forcing one. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the arrest, I put on my good coat and drove to Greater Emmanuel Baptist Church. Pastor Williams was in his office when I arrived, working through a stack of correspondence with the focused patience of a man who had long ago accepted that the administrative weight of a congregation was simply part of the calling. He stood when I came in and shook my hand with both of his, the way he had shaken it at the graveside, and asked me to sit down. We talked for a while first. About Ruth, about the church, about the community. He asked how I was managing, and I told him, honestly, some days better than others, most days better than the week before. He nodded at that. He had sat with enough grieving people to know the shape of it. Then I told him what I had come to say. Ruth loved this building, I said. She loved it more than any place outside our home. She used to say that the roof over a church is not just a roof. It is a promise to the community that the space will be there when they need it. I looked at him. I know the roof has needed work for a long time. Ruth mentioned it more than once. Pastor Williams smiled a small, rueful smile. It has been on our capital campaign list for 3 years, he said. We're about 40,000 short of being able to move forward. I reached into my jacket and took out the envelope Sandra had prepared. I set it on the desk between us. That should cover it, I said, with enough left for whatever else needs doing. He opened the envelope. He looked at the check inside for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at me. James, he said. Ruth would have done it herself if she'd had more time, I said. I'm just finishing what she started. He nodded slowly. He understood that. We talked then about the scholarship. I had been thinking about it for 2 weeks, turning it over, working out the details the way Ruth would have worked them out, practically and specifically, without sentimentality, but with care. Ruth had wanted to be a nurse when she was young. Her family had not had the money for it, and she had built a different life, a good life. But she had never entirely let go of that particular road not taken. She had mentioned it perhaps 4 times in 38 years, always briefly, always without bitterness, in the way that strong people mention the things they have accepted. I want to establish a scholarship, I told Pastor Williams, annual, for nursing students from this community, students who need the financial support to finish what they started. I paused. I want it named for Ruth. He was quiet for a moment. The Ruth Holloway Nursing Scholarship, he said, as if hearing how it sounded. Yes, I said. We worked out the details, the amount, the criteria, the selection process, the partnership with the community college program on the East Side. Pastor Williams took notes in his careful handwriting and asked the right questions. And by the time we were done, an hour later, something real had been built in that room, something that would outlast both of us and carry Ruth's name forward into years she would not see. I felt, walking out of his office, something I had not felt in 3 weeks. Not happiness exactly, but its more durable cousin, purpose. The sense that the morning had been worth what it asked of you. In the hallway outside Pastor Williams's office, I stopped. The door to the main sanctuary was open, and I looked in. The church was empty at this hour.
the pews bare, the morning light coming through the stained glass in long, colored bars across the floor. I walked in and sat down in the front row, the same pew where I had sat 3 weeks ago, with Dottie weeping softly on one side and an empty chair on the other. I sat in it now, and the empty chair was still there, technically, but it did not feel the same. 3 weeks ago, that emptiness had been an accusation. Now, it was simply a space, the way all spaces are simply spaces, until someone chooses what to do with them. I reached into my coat pocket. The envelope from Marcus was there. I had been carrying it for 11 days, taking it out and looking at it and putting it back, waiting for the moment Ruth had meant when she wrote, "Open when you need to." Not her letter, his. But the principle felt the same. I held it in both hands and looked at it in the colored light coming through the stained glass. I was not ready yet. I knew that clearly. There was something still working itself out in me, some settling that had not finished. And opening that letter before it was done would not serve either of us. I put it back in my pocket and sat for a while longer in the quiet of the empty church. Then I stood, straightened my coat, and walked back out into the November morning. The cemetery was on the east side of the city, 12 minutes from the house, the same 12 minutes as Greater Emmanuel, as if Ruth had arranged in death to stay close to the two places she had loved most in life. I drove there on a Thursday morning, 4 weeks after the funeral, with a bunch of yellow sunflowers on the passenger seat. Ruth had grown sunflowers in our backyard every summer for as long as I could remember. She planted them along the back fence in late May, and by August they were taller than the fence itself, their faces turned toward whatever sun Detroit managed to produce, obstinate and bright and indifferent to the heat. I used to tease her about them, told her they were too big, that they blocked the light from her other plants, that the neighbors probably had opinions. She told me the neighbors could grow their own flowers. She grew the sunflowers every year until the summer before she got sick, when she was too tired to plant, but not too tired to sit in the yard and look at the place where they had been. I had not been able to bring her sunflowers in November. They were out of season, difficult to find, the kind of thing that required looking. I had looked. I parked and walked across the grass. The ground was hard with the beginning of the real cold, the frost that had finally settled in after weeks of threatening. The cemetery was quiet at this hour. A groundskeeper's truck parked near the maintenance building in the distance. A woman standing alone at a grave 3 rows over. A pair of crows moving slowly across the grass between the stones. The ordinary life of a place set aside for the permanent ones. Ruth's stone was simple gray granite, her name and dates, and a single line beneath them that she had chosen herself 2 years ago when she was making the arrangements. She did not tell me she was making. She showed up. That was what she had asked for. 3 words. I had not known until Sandra showed me the file, and when I read them, I had to sit down because they were so completely, exactly right. Because showing up, reliably and without ceremony, and regardless of the cost to herself, was the truest thing about Ruth Holloway. And she had known it and claimed it, and I had not thought to say it while she was alive. I crouched and placed the sunflowers in the vase at the base of the stone. I straightened them until they stood properly the way she would have straightened them. Then I stood and put my hands in my coat pockets and talked to her. I told her about the scholarship. I told her about Pastor Williams's face when he opened the envelope, the way he had said her name when he read it. Ruth Holloway. As if the name itself was a complete sentence. I told her I thought she would have been embarrassed by the naming of it, and pleased by the thing itself, which was exactly her, always more interested in the work than in the credit for it. I told her the house was all right. I told her I had moved her reading glasses from the side table to the bedroom, not to put them away, but because I wanted them somewhere more private, somewhere that was just mine to see. I told her the maple tree had lost every last leaf, but looked in its bare November way entirely sure of itself.
I told her about Marcus.
I told her I had not opened his letter. I told her I had been carrying it for 2 weeks and had taken it out and looked at it more times than I could count, turning it over in my hands, trying to find the moment she had meant when she wrote those words on the envelope she left for me. Open when you need to. I had thought those words were about her letter, but standing here now, I understood they were a principle. They applied to all the things you were not yet ready for. You waited.
You did the work of getting ready. And then you opened it.
I reached into my coat pocket and took out Marcus's envelope.
I held it for a moment.
Then I placed it at the base of the stone, beneath the sunflowers in the cold ground, beside her name.
Not because I wanted her to read it.
She already knew what was in it. She had known Marcus longer than I had, and she had never been under any illusions about him, even when she loved him, which was always. I placed it there because this was the one decision I needed more time with, and she was the person I had always talked to when I needed more time. Even now. Especially now.
I stood at the stone for a while after that, not talking, just standing.
The cold came up through the soles of my shoes, and the crows moved somewhere behind me, and the woman 3 rows over got in her car and drove away. And I stayed.
I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be for whatever years were left.
Not the detective, though, that was in me permanently woven into the way I looked at every room I entered. Not the widower, though, that was in me now too, a weight I would carry and in time learn to carry well. Something else. Something that Ruth had been modeling for me for 38 years without ever once naming it. A person who showed up.
I thought about forgiveness.
Not the dramatic, sudden kind, not the kind that arrives in a moment and solves everything. The other kind, the slow kind. The kind that is less a decision than a direction. Something you turn yourself toward and begin walking, and do not expect to arrive at quickly.
Marcus had made choices.
They had been bad choices, damaging choices, choices that had reached into his mother's final weeks and used her name to feed something greedy and afraid in him. He would face what those choices had built. That was right, and I did not regret it.
But he was also the boy from the parking lot. He was also the boy I had taught to drive on a Saturday morning, both of us laughing when he clipped the curb. He was 38 years old, and he was in a great deal of trouble. And he had a long road ahead. And at the end of that road, if he walked it honestly, there might be a man worth knowing.
I did not know if I would be there when he arrived. I did not know if the distance was crossable, but I had placed his letter at the base of his mother's stone, and I had not burned it.
That was something.
That was for today enough.
I picked up the envelope.
I put it back in my pocket. I touched the top of Ruth's stone once, the granite cold and solid and permanent under my hand. And then I turned and walked back toward the truck. The sun was low over Detroit, the way it is in November, cutting sideways through the bare trees and making long shadows across the grass. The city sat beyond the cemetery fence, gray and enduring, full of people going about the ordinary business of their lives, unaware and unbothered by the specific weight of this particular morning.
I got in the truck. I thought about what I had done and whether I had done it right. I thought about the people who would hear this story and call me hard, call me cold, call me a man who chose the law over his son. Maybe they were right. I did not know. I knew that I had loved Ruth for 38 years, and I had kept my promise to her. And I knew that the house was still standing, and the scholarship had been funded, and the sunflowers were in the vase at the base of her stone. And I knew that I was still here, still upright, still, as she had always said, I would be all right.
I started the engine. If this story has found you at a moment when you are carrying something heavy, a family that has hurt you, a choice you are not sure about, a loss you are still learning to hold, I hope it has offered something useful. Not an answer, just the reminder that you are allowed to protect what you have built, You are allowed to love someone and still hold them accountable. You are allowed to grieve and fight at the same time. Ruth knew that. She built it into every document she signed. Every clause she asked Sandra to add. Every year she showed up in this life without asking to be thanked for it. She showed up. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you have had to let face their own consequences, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if you believe that the things we build with our hands and our years are worth protecting, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from lives lived all the way through. Until next time.